Imagine writing a 500-page book on a sport that you are passionate about, but that you basically disapprove of. That, okay, is what the South African writer, currently living in England, London, I think, did when he wrote Dark Trade, Lost in Boxing, which was published in England first in 1996, but was brought out an American edition with 50 extra juicy pages, was brought out in 2019 by Hamilcar Publications in Boston. And it sports a gorgeous cover, thanks to the painter Amanda Kelly, who did a portrait of Donald McRae's favorite boxer and the fighter with whom he has the most access in Dark Trade, James Toney Jr. You know, there's a line in the book where McRae describes James Toney Jr. as looking like a menacing monk. And I wonder if Amanda Kelly used that line for inspiration when she did the cover painting. The thesis statement of the book is sort of like, yes, boxing is a dangerous and brutal sport, but Don McRae can't help but respect and admire the fighters, and to make us respect and admire them. There's a line where he says, even in such a soiled and greedy world, would you find men who are bright and fine? Another way to put the book would be that it's sort of the book written by an inveterate boxing fan and also skilled and savvy journalist who knows how to get close to his subjects, get them to like him and trust him, and then to say interesting and fascinating things. There was a period when Don McRae traveled throughout the US following his favorite fighters, like Mike Tyson, James Toney Jr., Roy Jones, Evander Holyfield, the British fighter Prince Nassim Hamed, the British fighters also, which I'll get back to, Chris Eubank and Michael Watson. There's also some great stuff on Don King and also Oscar de la Hoya. And the book is impressive because of his access to these people. With James Toney, he actually gets to do the ring walk with him and sit with him in those, they must be terrifying meditative moments before a fighter leaves to do the ring walk. You know, the British edition, I think a couple of publishers published it. And on one of the editions, Mike Tyson was on the cover, and in another, Evander Holyfield was. I don't understand Holyfield being on the cover, although he plays a role in the book. But I can definitely understand why Mike Tyson was on the cover, because in that span, in the 90s, Don McRae was able to really do the full arc of Mike Tyson's phenomenal boxing career. How he just terrified everybody. There's a great, he calls him the darkest of stars, and at one point wonders what must have been done to him to make him that frightening. He has conflicting feelings about Tyson because of his criminal record, the way he treated women. It's interesting when he talks about how he became more interested in Tyson as a man rather than a fighter, and that sort of comes to fruition in the added on section, the new section, where there's some really good stuff in interviews with Tyson. But he also, at points in the book, it's interesting to see how his opinion changes or fluctuates about Tyson throughout the book. It's almost like he respects him but doesn't want to. At one point he writes, there seemed too much tangled chaos in his heart for light and love to last. He really is a master stylist, the way he can, you know, string together these Anglo-Saxon words, these one-syllable Anglo-Saxon words, so they almost sound biblical. He also talks about, Tyson's decline when he kind of lost his aura of intimidation in the second Holyfield fight, when he became, yelping like a child, when he, winced at the cut work that was done after Holyfield headbutted him, and then he eventually bit off Holyfield's ear in the second Tyson-Holyfield fight. So I can definitely see how Tyson could be on the cover, although Kyle Serafine, who is the director of Hamilcar Publications, claimed it was for purely commercial reasons. I'm sure commercial reasons came into it, but I can definitely see how Tyson could be on the cover of that book without it being a purely, commercial appeal for book sales. But there are also, great lines about, like, Roy Jones when he describes him entering the ring and rubbing up against the ropes and shivering. He says how it was like boxing and fucking had melted into one, or something like that. Also, there's a great line about his first boxing hero, Muhammad Ali, when he finally meets him in he's well into his Parkinson's, and he describes his face as looking like a plastic bag filled with brackish water. And, that sounds cruel, but in the context of the book, it's just sad and true, and it comes across as heartbreaking, not cruel. I want to talk about a key element to this book, which first comes into play when he writes about a fight that occurred in 1991 between two British fighters, Chris Eubank and Michael Watson. He had just real close access to both fighters before that fight, and the rivalry between them was really personal. They seemed to really hate and dislike each other. They had already fought once, and Chris Eubank had won a sort of controversial decision. And then in the second fight that took place in 1991, Michael Watson just dominated for 11 rounds. And then at the end of the 11th, Chris Eubank landed this almost lethal uppercut that dropped Michael Watson to the canvas. He did get to his feet and was saved by the bell, but the punch ended up crippling him for life. He came out for the 12th round just covered up, and then the fight was called off, and then he collapsed completely and was in a coma for a while. He also writes about a couple of other fights in this same vein. I think there's another one in 1996 when the British fighter Nigel Benn, who many people considered past his prime, took on the challenger, Gerald, or I don't know, maybe Nigel Benn was the challenger, but Nigel Benn and Gerald McClellan fought, this very intimidating American fighter. And after McClellan knocked Benn to the canvas early, Benn kind of surged up and fought back and ended up giving McClellan a beating that put him in a coma and left him brain damaged for the rest of his life. And he also talks about a fighter who died, a guy named Jimmy Garcia, who was killed by a fighter, a good fighter named Gabriel Ruedas. So there is this theme throughout the book of the tremendous, devastating consequences of fighting, not only in these sort of sudden endings to fights where people are put into comas, but also in the long-term damage to fighters. But there's a great line which he writes in a great paragraph right after the Eubank-Watson fight, where he's at ringside, and he describes just how that fight fans can't understand how hard professional fighters hit unless they're ringside. But the line is, after he realizes that something really heavy and devastating has gone down, where he writes, when else, as an adult, if not in sex or sleep, had I been so beyond the mundane? Right? There is, as much as he's ashamed of this brutal aspect of the sport, he recognizes that that is a great part of what draws him to it. And I mean, I can agree. I mean, there is nothing so riveting to watch and devastating to watch as seeing a world-class athlete who is trained so long just go limp at one blow. I mean, it is probably the closest thing to sort of beauty and horror overlapping that at least I know, because I've never been to war or I've never seen a man murdered in front of me. A couple of other things I want to say about this book. I think it was an advantage or an added pleasure reading this book, not having been a rabid fight fan in the 90s. I've always loved boxing, but I've never followed it religiously. So that meant that many of the fights that he wrote about, I didn't know the outcome. So he writes and describes the fights really well. He builds them up really well. So I had this added pleasure of reveling in the suspense. Also, he's just really, really good about describing why boxing is special. What makes boxing, the highs and lows of boxing, more impressive. Just describing, like, when a fighter wins, how much more it means because of all that he survived. My wheelhouse, obviously, is memoir, and some people kind of build it to me as memoir. I think it's more of a chronicle, and the book jacket copy calls it, again, more precisely a chronicle, but it's a very personal chronicle. The opening chapter to the book is pure memoir, where he writes about his time growing up in the late 60s, early 70s in a town, I think it's called Germiston, South Africa, which is not far from Johannesburg, and his passion and having Cassius Clay, who ultimately became Muhammad Ali, having Cassius Clay as his hero allowed him, as a white kid, to break through the walls of apartheid and connect with some of his black neighbors. There are some good sections in that opening memoir, but I would say it falters slightly because it has a clear thesis statement. He seems to want to give social significance to his passion for boxing. And, also there's this sense that he is, in the book, ashamed of being a white South African. I can understand that. Perhaps if I grew up during apartheid as a white man and benefited from the advantages, I would also feel ashamed. I can understand the feeling of that, but intellectually, just because you're a white South African doesn't mean that you're racist. He's obviously not. Again, I want to say how impressive the extra 50 pages are in Dark Trade at the end. It's just not just a gesture that he did to make the book new, but there's some really great interviews in there with all of his favorite fighters, or most of them. He really sums up the book well. He brings it up to date. It really is worth getting the American edition. Even if you follow this in England or whatever, it's worth getting the American edition so that you can get Don McRae's most recent insights on the sport that he loves so much but is sort of slightly ashamed of. Check it out. Dark Trade, Lost in Boxing. You won't be disappointed, man. You won't be.